Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from lunch, and welcome to this panel discussion on digital storytelling. My name is Tristan Clare, and I'm the Director of Physician Engagement at the Canadian Medical Association. For those in the room, would just ask that if you could just move on up a little bit, please. There's going to be some group discussion and some dialogue, so it would really help for those purposes. And it's a pleasure for me to introduce our presenters today, Daisy Dulé, Michael Lang, and Christy Wolf.
A smattering of applause, all right. Welcome, friends. My name is Christy Wolf. I will be moderating today's session, Reclaiming Voice in Medicine, Digital Storytelling as a Catalyst for Connection and Culture Change. The reason this job landed with me is because I'm a podcast host. We have a podcast called Co-Created where we talk about the stories behind digital storytelling. For those of you who haven't heard about digital storytelling before, it is a 2 to 4 minute movie that's created with a trained facilitator about a meaningful moment in a person's life. It's done with a voiceover narration, personal or stock images and video clips, editing techniques, and music. And so that all comes together in a 2 to 4 minute video, and you'll get a chance to see a couple of those today. Our objectives today are to introduce how digital storytelling is complementary to narrative medicine, to discuss how digital storytelling can be integrated into physician wellness, research, quality improvement, and leadership, as well as to explore the potential of storytelling to reimagine medical culture.
Before we begin on this journey, we just want to acknowledge that we are here on the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Indigenous traditions of storytelling is such an integral part of their culture, right? And so to think about that and how it grounds us for this session as well. And I think when we share stories, it's an opportunity to share wisdom, to heal and connect through space and time. And I'm Daisy Dulé, the next slide. I'm Daisy Dulé, and I'm a cardiologist by training, and I live on the unceded territories of the Algonquin-speaking peoples. My disclosures that are listed here are not relevant for this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Great, yeah, hi everyone. My name is Mike Lang. I acknowledge the disclosures on the screen there. I work with all sorts of healthcare organizations, not-for-profits, but also large provincial healthcare organizations to create digital stories to be used for all sorts of different purposes around the healthcare system. And I also, sort of acknowledging on the screen there, connected to the University of Calgary in the Faculty of Nursing as an adjunct assistant professor.
Perfect. So, Christy Wolf. Mike and I are both from Treaty 7 in Alberta, and my disclosures are also on the screen. I am the owner of Christy Wolf Stories. I work with Mike in common language digital storytelling to support facilitation of stories across organizations, and I'm the executive director of the Wolfpack Warriors Foundation. One of the other things that kind of comes up in our conversation today is my lived experience as well. So I am the mother of a child with congenital heart disease who's had multiple heart surgeries, as well as the daughter of a cardiologist who died by suicide. And these are topics that are going to come up throughout our conversation today. But Mike, let's get started with why are we talking about storytelling in medicine?
Yes, yeah. It's amazing. I made my first documentary film 15 years ago, and we did a cross-Canada road trip to every major cancer center in the country. It was about being a young adult cancer survivor, and we showed it in grand services and grand rounds and in-services and things like that. And it was amazing to me because in every single one of those presentations, someone would stand up and say, I've been in oncology for 20 years, but what I learned from your story was. And it blew me away. I was 25 years old, never made a movie before in my life, but it sort of tipped me off to this idea that maybe the healthcare system needed more stories or better told stories. And back then I had to start every single presentation with a description about why stories mattered. And I think it's amazing being at this conference with all of you because there's this inherent sort of understanding now of how stories are important to the healthcare system, and I think in particular to physician health and wellness. And but one of the best descriptions, I think, of why stories matter is up on the screen there. It's from a book of a physician, Rachel Naomi Remen, and some of you may have heard of her. Some of you may have read this book. It's a wonderful little book. And she, in the foreword, has a quote, "Facts bring us to knowledge, but stories lead to wisdom." And I think historically, we've been really good at the facts and knowledge part in healthcare. And we can give you all the brochures and pamphlets and PowerPoint slides and all that stuff that you need. But what we haven't been that good at historically is sharing the stories of the people who have walked this path before you, so that you can glean wisdom from those stories and then apply it to your own life. And I think this really matters, especially on this topic of physician wellness, because I really believe, that there's, all the answers, I think, to a lot of the challenges around physician wellness are actually here in this room, embedded in the lived experiences of the people here. And through stories, we're able to actually start to dive a little deeper underneath the surface of daily sort of clinical practice to find the deep layers of wisdom that are available to all of us if we stop and spend time thinking about these stories. And really, the ancient Greeks have a word for this. It's called phronesis. Has anyone ever heard that word, phronesis? Yeah, practical wisdom. And that is really important, right? It's something that's very hard to teach. And it's sort of this knowledge that comes from experience. And being experienced is really important in healthcare. And it's really hard to become experienced because we only get to live one life, right? We only have one life to live. And so we can only have a limited amount of experience, except by being able to experience other people's lives through the stories that they tell us. And that's why stories are so important. They can allow us to become experienced. When someone shares a story with us, that experience becomes our own, and we can live many lives through the stories of others. And you've seen it play it out this whole conference, right? 2 amazing plenaries that use stories, right? And through those stories, we get to glean all this wisdom that we can then take and apply to our daily lives and our clinical practice, in your guys' case. So that's really why stories are important. I'm excited to talk more about that with everyone here today.
And so Daisy, talk a little bit more about the connection to narrative medicine.
Well, to me, the way I think of it is it's in a continuum of the narrative medicine. Initially, when we think about narrative medicine, it's the writing piece, it's the text base, but it has evolved over time. So one of the things that I think of is, story rounds that started off with at Stanford. And the other one is the Nocturnus podcast, where physicians share their stories, some good, some bad, some funny, some sad, right? So it makes those opportunities to connect, reflect, and understand the human experience of what we go through.
Perfect. So throughout today's session, we're actually going to be watching 2 digital stories. As you watch, we want you to reflect on what stands out for you. What do you notice? What resonates? We will take a few minutes after each of the stories to have a conversation at your table. So if you are sitting by yourself, maybe just get up and go meet somebody new. We'll also have Mike in the chat. So if you're online, definitely add your thoughts and ideas in there as well. We want to hear your voices. This is a lot about conversation. We often will say that watching a story and moving on to the next thing on the agenda doesn't do justice to the story. We need to stop and have conversation about what's resonating for people out of those stories, what wisdom you might be able to draw from it, what you can learn for your practice or your own life, are things that are really key to using storytelling when you're talking about it in audiences like this. We also just want everyone here to be aware that these stories do deal with topics like mental health, burnout, and suicide. So if you're not ready to engage with that kind of a story, we ask that you step out, take care of yourself. There's a room here that you can use if you just need a quiet space. The staff here at CMA will be able to help you with that. And with that, our first story is Daisy's story. Now, Daisy, will you introduce us to the path now taken?
So this is a story that I talk about my burnout, and I worked with you, Christy, to develop this. And for part of me, it was just like I reached a point where it wasn't, I was just trying to get through the day because that's what the system expected me to do until I couldn't. It was the physical and the mental toll that took on me, and then the journey afterwards as well. And as we did this together, one of the things was I started reclaiming that voice and just shining the light on the shame that we try to push down, as Dr. Will Bynum talked about this morning. But it was just, again, the reflection of taking that time to slow down and process the emotions that were associated with this and how to move forward.
So as we watch, reminder, you're going to be reflecting on what stands out for you. Now, it could be as simple as a word that stands out to you, an image, an idea, a feeling. You're going to get the sense of what a digital story is as you watch this. But I should also mention that to co-create a story like this, it takes about 16 to 20 hours. So it's a short video, but it's a long story. Please play the video.
Over the years, life became heavier. The weight of work, a flailing healthcare system, the family moments I felt like I was missing, even though I was there. I no longer recognized who I was. Work conflicts and the pandemic created isolation. Isolation my body could no longer internalize, despite my mind telling itself, "You can get through this, just lean in more." Until one day, my body had enough. I was on call, heading to assess a critical situation, when the feeling of dread consumed me, my breathing restricted, nearly bringing me to my knees. I was paralyzed with an unfamiliar feeling of utter helplessness. While it felt like it was out of the blue, the reality was I had been trying to suppress the chronic stress for so long. My body was now fighting back. The timing was not ideal. I had a patient. I had to make a difficult decision. Do I call a colleague to take over and deal with the shame and guilt afterwards? Or do I do the procedure myself and hide behind my armor? But what about the patient? What would I want for my loved one? From the time I was a teenager, I had always wanted to be a physician. Serving others was important to me. This patient got the help they needed, but that decision was the hardest of my career. I felt completely alone. I was scared my professional life was over. Looking back, this incident was a blessing for both myself and for my family. With the help of others, I have been able to reframe that situation as a moment of transformation rather than a career-ending event. I have been able to recalibrate and learn more about myself, letting go of the person everyone expected me to be. That day on call was a fork in the road. I had a choice: to stay on the course or take an uncharted route. I chose the latter. Creating boundaries allowed me to be more present at home and at work, while maintaining my core value of seva, the Sanskrit word for serving others. The fear of the unknown is now replaced with hope, gratitude, and contentment.
Okay, I have to say that I've made people stand up and give Daisy a standing ovation before. She was like, "Don't do it." So I'm so glad you clapped. She told me I wasn't allowed to.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we've had an opportunity to watch a digital story. Mike, can you please talk to everybody about the process of digital storytelling?
Sure. Yeah. If you want to learn more, there's a citation on the screen there. We did write an entire textbook on the methodology, but I published a very short paper that gives you a bit of a background on sort of the process. But really, we needed a process that would work everywhere in the world. I've done digital storytelling in rural Uganda and with physicians in Alberta, right? So very different context. But we found these 4 phases sort of are able to capture the process. And so the first one is finding the story. And this is where the facilitator works with the group or the individual to find the meaningful moments in someone's experience related to the topic that they're exploring. Shame, for example. What was a meaningful moment for you in the context of your clinical experience in shame? And so people start to come up with these meaningful moments. I often refer to this phase as finding meaning in the mundane, because there's meaning everywhere around us, but we don't often stop and reflect on what that meaning could be. And so that's the first part of the process, is with the facilitator finding the meaningful moments that you want to include. Then there's the telling phase. And this is where we use all these principles of creative screenwriting that come a lot from Hollywood to turn those meaningful moments into something that communicates an idea to the audience without telling people exactly what that idea is, right? It's so through the moments of the story, people can just absorb the important information from the story. And so that's the telling phase, and you help people write a short 400 to 600 word voiceover in just a short period of time. Then there's the crafting phase, and this is where, depending on the process, you can actually work one-on-one with someone, and Daisy could be the director, and I can be the editor and help her put it together on the screen, but she tells me what she wants. Or we often actually teach people basic video editing principles, and they do all the video editing themselves. They choose the images, they put the transitions in, they put the music in, and that is a really sort of cool way to enhance the interpretive potential of the story, using metaphor, using imagery, using music, like we heard. And that we use, crafting is really, we tell people the words tell people what happens. The images help them feel what's happening, right? And that's what we do in the crafting. And then finally, there's the sharing phase where we do a small group sharing with all the people in the workshop, or with friends and family, or potentially people can distribute it wider, like Daisy's doing right now in front of a larger audience. But that's an important part of the process to sort of close off the experience. All of this is underlined by this core ethical principle called storyteller well-being. And basically, that's an operationalized ethical idea of every decision that's made is meant to enhance storyteller well-being, not detract from storyteller well-being. And so we teach a 54-hour course on this, so there's the crash course. But really quickly, the ways that you can use digital stories. There's lots of different projects. I've created over 1,000 digital stories now with patients and families and healthcare providers. And you can, primarily they fall in these categories of education, advocacy, research, so that's knowledge generation or knowledge translation, and then therapeutic intent. And in that, you can actually use the process of creating the story to achieve these goals, or you can use the sharing of the digital stories to achieve these goals. An example would be, I do work with nurses and faculty of nursing. We can do digital storytelling, creating a digital story to share important moments from sort of their clerkship or something like that they're involved in. Or we can share digital stories from patients and families to help teach them about a specific healthcare topic. So you can see you can use both sides of the creation process or the viewing process to achieve these educational goals. So there's a real quick crash course. I think in physician wellness, you could use either people creating the stories to help process some of these difficult clinical experiences that they have, or just like what we experienced today, we could share stories from others and use that as a way to start meaningful conversations about some of these difficult topics like shame and trust and things like that I think really you're going to learn just as much through the story of someone else as you could ever learn through the research data that can be shared on those topics. So yeah, there we go. There's the 5-minute crash course on it. So
I can just add to it, it's like the meaning making.
Yeah.
In multiple forms. And to your point of you write the story, then it's the layer of the picking of the images, the music, and then putting it all together and then sharing it. It just, all those different layers then hits the different parts of your brain. And that creates the opportunity to reflect in different ways and processed in different ways. So it's to me, it's just like really exciting to be able to do this kind of work. And I've done a second story, and it still excites me to do those processes.
And will you talk a little bit more about similar ways that storytelling has been used in medicine?
Well, I think in many ways, like when I think about the ways that we use it to reflect on a critical incident. So again, like the therapeutic intent. But we also know that when we use narrative medicine, digital story falls into that and allows us to be more compassionate, right? It allows us to understand and take perspectives of others. And for example, in the story that's going to be coming up, it highlights for me a perspective I hadn't even thought of, which was family and extended family in a patient's journey. So, to me, it's like being able to take a step back and really zoom out sometimes, but also zoom in depending on what the story is about.
Perfect. All right. Why don't you tell them about the next story that's coming up?
Well, before we do that, it's one of the things that how I got involved in this was actually Christy's father was my colleague. Dr. Dennis Morgan was a cardiologist, and I didn't know him well, but his death has had a significant impact on me. At the time of his suicide, I was just returning from my second maternity leave and struggling, trying to balance work and life, and just trying to do the best I could at everything, and me being a perfectionist, and then this happening, and his death and the subsequent silence afterwards, or the challenges of I really had a hard time processing it, and that got me into physician wellness. And then years later, when the burnout happened, I reached out afterwards to Christy to share what her father's death meant to me, and then that led to us collaborating together.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about now. And it was also interesting just in all of these different conversations. Like Daisy reached out by email. I was presenting about photography at the time and just lived experience and showing yourself in the story. And Daisy reached out and just said, would it be okay if I told you a story about your dad? And yeah, absolutely. This was probably about 4 or 5 years after he had died. And so that was like the beginning. And I think that's also something that I think about with the digital story, that you're reaching out to somebody with an experience. And I may never hear from people that see a story that I've created or that I've worked on with somebody else, and that's actually not what matters. It's that you take something from that experience and go forward with it. And if it resonates for you, you find a way to put that into practice, or whatever it's going to be from that particular story. So this story was done by my mom. So this is Cheryl's story. It's called Nana's story. And she is telling her perspective of my son's heart surgery. So she's the grandmother in the situation of a patient story. She's my mother, so she's watching me manage this. And then she also talks about my father a bit in the story, and that's kind of why we chose this story to share.
With permission.
With permission, we did ask, we always ask. But I also wanted to just say that my mother would never share this in front of this audience. She would never speak it in front of the audience. She would be uncomfortable being in the room while it was being shared. So this is something that she's comfortable with it being seen and leading to conversation, but she's never gonna be the storyteller on stage doing that. And so this is one of the ways that I think that things like digital storytelling offer an opportunity to some of the underrepresented voices that we have, that we can bring those forward in a different way that maybe we haven't thought about. There's care for storytelling as you're working through the process. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking. So, same thing, you're gonna watch for what resonates with you, and we'll talk after. Please play the video.
No one ever thinks to ask what a grandparent goes through with a medical kid. On September 23rd, 2019, I hugged my 7-year-old grandson Kane goodbye as he headed off to the Children's Hospital for his second open heart surgery, having had his first at the age of 1. I watched as Kane and his pack drove away with tears in my eyes, wondering what the next few days would bring. And thus began the wait. had come to help out in any way I could, particularly to take care of Kane's 5-year-old brother Maverick. We wanted him to have a normal routine. This way, his parents were free to spend as much time as possible at the hospital with Kane. Needless to say, I had long, agonizing hours to sit at home waiting for word. Quick emails and texts told me Kane was prepped, then going into surgery, then in recovery, and finally back in his room. And those were long intervals. I had no previous experience with children in hospitals. I grew up in a large family in Newfoundland where the worst incidents were an occasional broken bone. Likewise, with my own children, there was nothing of real significance. I had rushed our son to the hospital one night when he fell out of bed, but he only required a single stitch. But sprained ankles, stitches, broken bones were nothing compared to open heart surgery. Another thing that made it especially difficult is that my husband Dennis had been a cardiologist. If he had been around, he would certainly have been involved, asking the right questions and helping to explain to me exactly what was going on. But sadly, he had died by suicide 4 years previously. A tragic result of the stigma that still exists around healthcare professionals seeking mental health supports. Luckily, our son, who is a medical professional, was there to ask the questions and explain to us exactly what was going on.
Hi, Wolfpack. Christy has asked me to give a demonstration of where Kane has had his surgeries in the past to help you get a clearer idea. So this is the heart, and this is the aorta. This is the...
But I was sitting at home, reading children's books, playing with Maverick, and walking the dog. Waiting, worrying. How was it going? Are his parents holding up? What else could I be doing to support them? As much as I loved spending time with Maverick, what I really wanted was to be at the hospital, to see for myself, to support my daughter. Understandably, grandparents and extended family are not included in the consultations, procedures, and follow-ups. But that doesn't make it any easier. We still wait. We still worry. And for me, it was alone. My life companion no longer around. I finally did get to the hospital to see for myself that our heart warrior was awake and slowly recovering from his ordeal. The relief was intense, but the worry was still there. Would his heart resume normal function? Is he out of the woods? Only time will tell. No one ever thinks to ask what a grandparent goes through with a medical kid. Thank you to his medical team and to my support system.
So we just wanted to end with this slide. What stories are coming up for you? What story will you tell? We think there need to be more physician stories. The focus to date, as you've heard us talk about, has been on patients and families, and those are important stories to learn from, but it's also really important to learn in this kind of a space from other physicians and other healthcare providers, and be able to talk about those stories. We have talked a lot about sharing stories, but sharing a story could be with one other person in your life. It doesn't need to be in front of an audience. So just to kind of keep that in mind, it might be about the process of creating the story more for someone than the final product. There is a QR code up there. It takes you to a physician wellness page that we may or may not have built this weekend on Common Language, and it includes digital story examples. There's a couple podcasts from our co-created podcast that Daisy's one of the guests. Mike talks more about digital storytelling and how to meaningfully engage with lived experience stories. There's a few other ones on there. The methodology paper that he was referring to and some engagement articles are on there, as well as ways to connect with each of us if you have questions. Thank you all for joining us today to learn about storytelling and how it could be used in medicine.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Awesome.
Great. Thank you all for a great session, and thank you, Daisy, Michael, and Christy, for sharing your stories with us, with everybody in the room, and everyone attending virtually online. So with that, we're going to have a 15-minute health break, and before we all come back, everybody's going to come back into this room for the closing plenary, which begins at 2:30. Thank you.